The new academic year in Russia began under a shadow of heightened control, military influence, and exclusionary policies that are reshaping education nationwide. Russian students, from elementary school children to university attendees, traditionally start their school calendar on September 1st, a day celebrated across the country as Knowledge Day. However, this year's kickoff highlights how deeply schools have become arenas for advancing the Kremlin's political agenda, especially following the war in Ukraine. Under President Vladimir Putin's leadership, the government has steadily revised curricula in schools and universities to embed its ideological perspectives among young Russians. This strategy intensified significantly after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Since then, weekly classes centered on patriotism have become a regular fixture. History textbooks have been rewritten to reflect the Kremlin's preferred narrative, and funding for militarized youth programs has dramatically increased, quadrupling over recent years. This transformation has a clear message. Schools are no longer just educational spaces, but battlegrounds for shaping loyalty and worldview. Yet, the impact goes beyond ideology. It also includes increasingly restrictive policies that effectively shut out entire groups, such as migrant children, from the education system. One of the most controversial changes this academic year is the introduction of strict admission rules targeting children of migrants. New legislation, which came into force in April, bars these children from enrolling in Russian schools unless they pass a Russian language proficiency test and prove official residency. While many countries impose language assessments to help integrate non-native speakers, Russia's approach is drastically different and has drawn sharp criticism from human rights advocates. Olga Abramenko, a specialist at the Memorial Anti-Discrimination Center, explains to Novaya Gazeta Europe that unlike elsewhere, where such testing serves to place migrant children appropriately and offer language support classes, the Russian system is unique in using these criteria as a barrier to access. Rather than support integration, the policy risks isolating migrant children socially and increasing their vulnerability to radicalization or criminal involvement. The statistics underscore this troubling trend. Out of 1,800 foreign children applying to Russian schools this year, 81% were prevented from even sitting for the language test due to application errors or missing documents. Regional data paints an equally grim picture. In Komi, only 3 of 14 test takers passed, while in Sverdlovsk, just 13 of 66 succeeded. Even officials have taken notice. State Duma Speaker Vyacheslav Volodin acknowledged high failure rates, yet this condemnation triggered a rare dissent. Rustam Minikatov, Tatarstan's leader, publicly questioned the policy, emphasizing that children naturally acquire language skills within a few months, and calling for free Russian language courses to help migrant children integrate. Finding common ground, Minikatov pointed out Russia's economic reliance on migrants, describing them as mostly law-abiding and essential to the workforce. Still, select migrant pupils have been flagged for increased surveillance, with teachers instructed to watch for any signs of unlawful behavior based on new guidelines from the Education Ministry. This raises significant privacy and discrimination concerns. Meanwhile, the fate of indigenous languages in Russian education is another sore point. Starting this September, the weekly hours devoted to teaching indigenous languages and literature in first-grade classes across Russia have been cut to a mere single hour. Russia officially recognizes over 30 indigenous languages across its 21 ethnic republics, allowing their use in legal and educational settings. However, in practice, these languages have been progressively marginalized. Since 2017, the Kremlin has banned mandatory instruction of indigenous languages in local schools, shrinking their public presence to mostly informal use within families. The Education Ministry's recent decision to slash language instruction time sparked outcry from teachers, activists, and even some regional authorities. Educators warn that such minimal exposure cannot sustain these languages, especially given Russia's dominance and past restrictions. A former Tatar language teacher from Kazan expressed to the Moscow Times the near impossibility of meaningful language learning with only 1 hour per week, especially for young and often unmotivated children. They fear this move is only the beginning, potentially spreading to higher grades and accelerating the extinction of native tongues. Another significant development is the expansion of patriotic education programs involving even the youngest learners. Over 100 preschools in Russia and Ukrainian territories under Russian control launched important conversations lessons for children aged 3 to 7. This is part of a pilot effort advocated by Putin, aimed at instilling early respect for Russian culture, history, and family values, showcasing how the Kremlin's ideological reach now extends to preschoolers. The Ministry of Education also published a list of 37 patriotic songs for school music lessons, blending Soviet-era anthems with contemporary pro-war artists like Shaman. This carefully curated playlist illustrates the effort to inculcate patriotic sentiment early and consistently. At the same time, communication within schools is undergoing a state-directed overhaul. Teachers, students, and parents are being encouraged to switch all messaging to Max, a domestic app envisioned as a national platform, similar to China's WeChat. However, Max is already notorious for poor privacy protections, with its developer, VK, reportedly sharing user data with Russian security agencies, a change that raises concerns about surveillance and data security. In universities, the Kremlin's influence deepens further through admission quotas favoring veterans of the Ukraine war, security personnel stationed in occupied territories, and their families. Since 2023, these quotas have led to a steady increase in enrollment from these groups. In 2025, nearly 3,000 veterans and their children gained admission to Russia's top universities, a 58% rise from the previous year. Yet investigations show over 70% of these students would not have qualified under regular competition, raising questions about meritocracy and academic standards. Adding to this, the government plans to extend preferential admissions to wives and widows of Ukraine war veterans starting in 2026. Experts like Yan Levchenko argue this policy isn't about social mobility, but control, stating that the influx of veterans, families could transform universities, traditionally spaces for independent thought and quiet dissent, into environments more closely aligned with Kremlin interests. Simultaneously, the overall availability of state-funded university places declined by 2,000 compared to last year, while tuition fees continue to climb. This combination makes higher education increasingly out of reach for average Russian youth, potentially widening social inequalities. The presence of Ukraine war veterans isn't limited to student bodies. Many have taken roles as educators, having led patriotic lessons tens of thousands of times since the invasion began. At least 100 demobilized soldiers now work as school teachers, and some have even been appointed as headmasters, including Vladimir Starikov in Yekaterinburg, Russia's fourth-largest city. Starikov publicly promised to build a school of the future that is modern, creative, and open to new ideas. Though critics might question how this vision aligns with the tightening ideological control. And here's the part most people miss. Beyond shaping young minds, this militarized presence in education might be part of a broader attempt to normalize the war and strengthen societal acceptance of military values. In essence, Russia's education landscape is